A Beautiful Place to Die by Ronnie Ray Jenkins. Read by the author. Just below the old house was a long and worn footpath winding past huckleberries growing on green bushes. Just off the path, stands of aspen trees with shining silver bark waved under a bright sun, their quivering leaves casting shadows down from above to pockmark me with dappled black shapes. It was a circuitous path, endless, and it looped around to lead one eventually back to the path's beginning and home again. Through the woods it led to a small body of water held back by an earthen breastwork broken in the middle, for long ago someone once drowned in it. The never-ending path allowed one to walk across the breastwork of the dam. Halfway across it, golden wild grasses ended where the yellow clay and rocks were removed to drain the dam to recover the body, as I was told. It was a beautiful place to die, if one must die. I traveled the path from the age of 5 years old, and many times I traveled it alone. There was something about solitude even then for me. Although we only lived there until I was 8, my footprints played as much of a role to keep the path smooth as the deer who walked upon it did. There wasn't a single time, though, that my thoughts didn't somehow return to the drowning. Was it the morbid curiosity of death? Was it a young boy's fear of ghosts, and that maybe the dead boy's spirit floated with the early morning fog above the water? I'd heard the victim was only 12 or 13. I wondered back then if I would still be alive at that age. After all, death took him early, so what would make me so special? Why would I be granted a longer sentence on the planet than this kid? I had a million questions, but I had no answers. I recall walking the path and wondering if his feet touched the very soil I walked upon. I wondered if at some point was there any inkling to him that the clock was ticking as he left the path and neared the water, as if it was some sort of countdown to eternity. Worse yet, or better yet, is this where he stayed now for infinity? Could this be his personal heaven? After all, it was a beautiful place. There were bullfrogs, and sometimes a heron would land upon the water. There were raccoon along the banks, seeking out crayfish and sunfish glittering when the light caught their scales. There were green lily pads floating on silent water, and tall spruce and pines on the far side mirrored upon the smooth surface on those days when the weather was agreeable. It was a beautiful place to die, if one must die. Years later, I returned to the old dam. The aspen trees showed their age with broken branches, and some that toppled over now leaned against those trees still standing as if their destiny was to become support, like a cane for an old man. The huckleberry bushes seemed much sparser to me. The path required me to pause to make sure I still stood upon it, as it no longer carried the signs of usage. When I reached the shores, the water seemed lower, browner than before, and not nearly as wide as I remembered in youth. Still and seemingly unchanged, the stumps of trees poked up from the water like ancient statues carved not by man, but by time. I stood on the bank, and on a large stump near the middle, my eyes caught a glint of something. It was an old fishing plug impaling the wood, held tight by a rusted and bent hook. Then the drowning came back to me. Could the old jitterbug fishing plug snagged on the decaying log been the reason? Life snatched by the jaws of death, all because of what was tied to the end of a light blue 6-pound test, spider-web thin piece of fishing line, floating now in the air as a breeze moved across the water. Maybe the plug was borrowed from his father's old tackle box, and he didn't want to return home without it, for fear of Appalachian justice. All these years, and it still haunted me. I probably would never know what happened. No one would know. Maybe it was meant to be that way. Somewhere in the pines across the water, a gray squirrel barked, shaking me back to reality. It was a beautiful place to die, and it was a beautiful place to be alive.